Sir, the possibility of successfully navigating an asteroid field is approximately 3,720 to 1.
Never tell me the odds.
Hello, this is No, and I believe that if you take cranberries and stew them like applesauce, they taste much more like prunes than rhubarb does. Welcome to the After Effects Kickstart podcast.
If you don't know the past, you really can't know the future. Thanks for tuning in. Today we have arrived at part 4 of our History of Motion Graphics series, and I have to tell you, without a doubt, this is definitely the best one. In part, I think, because I let Joey do most of the talking, but also just because the 5 pieces that we chatted about today are so killer. I mean, I'd say that at least 3 of these are on my top 5 list of best motion design projects of all time. And one of these is, without a doubt, unabashedly, Joey's very favorite MoGraph piece ever. So you can definitely tell how excited we were to chat about all this stuff. So the pieces that we're talking about today were all made between 2012 and 2017. We're talking about the Good Books Metamorphosis piece by Buck, Box by G-Monk, the True Detective titles by Patrick Clare, the FITC Tokyo titles by Ash Thorpe, and finally the MailChimp Facebook ads by Giant Ant. And this is such a good discussion. I really think this is the best one, and I think you're going to get a lot out of this because we really cover a lot of ground here. It's not just about these 4 pieces. We talk a lot about, obviously, design and animation and technical things, which we always do. But in this, we also kind of we widen it out and we talk about how studios work, how they spend their money, and about the ethics of different studios. And there's definitely some kind of inside baseball moments from Joey and I. So this is a really big discussion, and I think you're going to get a lot out of it. In the end, we bring it all up to date and we put a nice big ribbon on the whole thing for you. So I'm like super excited about this and I want to just jump right in here. Okay, so let's get going. And we are back with the History of Motion Graphics, part 4. Actually, the final episode. Tears, I can't believe it. How time flies. Today we're going to talk about the period basically between 2012 and 2017. And just as an overview of this, my thinking about this period of time is that in continuation with what we were talking about last time is that studios are just getting bigger and bigger, and other studios are kind of fading away and they're of less importance. But big name designers are still ruling the day. People like G-Monk and Patrick Clare are more famous than ever, but also they're working not as individuals, but with huge teams as well. And I think this is a little bit of a change that happened in that period of time. And then I would just say the larger stylistic trends are obviously that traditional cell animation has just completely taken over the motion graphics industry, and CG is just getting better and better and better and more integrated. And then there's on the horizon, we all know that AR and VR are coming fast at us. So I kind of think that sums up where we are today.
Yeah, I would say that these pieces that we're going to talk about are really good examples of, I guess, what I would call MoGraph at scale. So, a lot of the things we've talked about, as amazing as they are, could be done by 1 or 2 or 3 people.
Right.
Some of the pieces we're going to look at today needed huge teams and pretty big budgets to be able to do. And it's great to see that motion graphics and motion design, whatever you want to call it, has evolved to this point where the production value of some of these pieces, rival feature films. And one of the things we're going to talk about is my favorite motion graphics piece ever.
Which he insisted that we look at because he loves it so much.
Yeah, I demanded it.
Cool. So let's jump in and talk about our first piece, which is the Good Books Metamorphosis piece made by Buck in 2012. This has Joe Mullen, who we talked about in the Waiting for Superman titles with J.R. Canest. He was the art director on this, as well as the lead designer with Joshua Harvey. So, the way I was kind of thinking about this is to talk about the impact first, but then also about the design and the animation of these pieces. But the impact here of this piece was huge. I think this, for starters, it kind of Buck was already kind of at the top of the heap, but I feel like when this came out, it indisputably made Buck into the top dog studio that nobody could touch them. If you agree with me. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll say, so my perspective was, I remember, I was deep into the MoGraph scene at this point. I was following Motionographer, and I was on MoGraph.net, and I think I was freelancing. But I remember when this came out,
Yes.
and it was like everybody was talking about it in the industry, and it was like, whoa, that is amazing. And what's crazy about it is the production techniques are not any different than what, Disney has been doing for decades, right?
Right.
For almost a century. But it was the mix of all these different techniques and the thinking and the storytelling and just the concept and the sound design and everything. And it set a new high bar for motion design when it came out.
It really did. Nobody could touch them after this. They seem to have snapped up all the best traditional animation talent at the time, and they were just like putting them to work. I mean, I just don't think people. I mean, you would see some of these kind of liquidy effects and stuff, I think, in a couple pieces before this, but this just really brought traditional and cell into the forefront here, and all the liquid stuff that they did in there too is just so hugely important for like everything that would come after. I feel like that's a trend that's still really going on. I mean, this, another kind of part of the impact of this that I think we see is that they lost a ton of money making this. This is a prestige piece that Buck made not to make money, but to establish, they had the goal to establish themselves as the top dog studio, I think, to make this. They wanted to put themselves on top of the world. And so they spent their own money on this, right? I mean, how much do you think this would cost to make?
I've often asked myself that question. So let's talk about the production of this, because students watching this, I want to be very clear that this is impossible to create with one person. Okay, right. I guess nothing's impossible. If there was one person you wanted to spend 9 years on something, it could happen. So I've actually had the pleasure of talking with Josh Harvey, who was creative director on this, and he said it took, I think, over 30 people 6 months. Okay, now that's not 30 people for 6 months straight. It's in between other jobs, but a lot of effort went into this. And I'm really glad you brought that point up, Noel, that this was not, that the client did not pay for this, okay? And this is something I feel very strongly about. And anyone listening to this, if you really want to make motion graphics, motion design your career, you will inevitably find yourself in this position where you want to do work that's cooler than you're currently doing, but there's a catch-22. No one's going to hire you and pay you to do cooler work until they've seen cooler work on your reel. So you always have to find ways to do what's called spec work, where you're doing it basically for free. And sometimes you get lucky and there's a little bit of money, but not enough for the client to be able to really demand full creative control. And you get to kind of do what you want. I'm guessing that's kind of what this was with Buck. They had a little bit of money, but certainly nothing even approaching what it would have cost to do this. But Buck saw an opportunity. We want to push our cell animation, traditional animation chops out there. We want to push our storytelling chops out there. And we want to make a piece that's a calling card that's going to get us tons and tons of really high paying work that's way cooler than the paying work we're getting right now. And let me say something else about the production of this too. So it's not obvious when you watch this what is cell animated, what is 3D animated, and what was done in After Effects. And there's a mix of all three.
Yes.
Buck is a master of jumping between formats. And so, for the students in this class, you probably don't have a grasp of After Effects that's at a high enough level yet to be able to pick out what the heck is, which piece is which here. But most of this was drawn frame by frame. And even if it wasn't literally like drawn on a blank white screen, they would animate pieces of it in 3D and then trace that frame by frame to create a hand-drawn look. They would composite things like ink blots in After Effects. And a lot of the texture and the color treatment on this was done in After Effects as well. Traditional animators would hand off, completely cell animated pieces to an After Effects artist who would then add texture to it and add color to it and put it on the background. And this is a massive, massive effort. No, I can't imagine. I've never been part of something this big.
Oh my goodness, neither have I. Yeah, from what I understand, there's a motionographer interview with Ryan Honey, who's the head of Buck, and him and somebody else, I forget who. They talk about the most difficult shots to make in this, and it was actually not necessarily that the really complex 3D shots. So the shot of the goat's head when it rears up and it's got like a million bugs all over it, I guess that was one of the most complicated ones, and that was something that they made in 3D and went back and forth on a bunch of times. But also the sort of liquidy head turns that happen at the end, all that they had to redo a bunch of times, and that was just straight up cell animation. So I think this was just difficult on a variety of levels, and I think definitely the transitions are kind of what make it one of the things that make it so special, because these transitions are just out of control and liquidy and just perfect, and one thing goes to the next so nicely. I mean, some real highlights for me is when the sort of, I don't know, stomach or something gets slashed and it kind of opens up and all the guts kind of spill out and then it turns into an eye. That part, I just remember like staring at that frame by frame, wondering like, was that drawn or was that 3D or exactly what that was? Yeah.
I had no idea how it was done when it came out. And after talking to the people that worked on it and learning, I mean, it makes it more impressive, even once you learn how it was done, because every single thing that was done in here, the cell animation, the compositing in After Effects, the 3D animation, the editing, the sound, everything was just 10 out of 10. And for the students listening, I should point out that at this level, this is like the top of the mountain in motion design. And at this level, the people working on stuff like this are typically specialists. So you don't need to start worrying, oh my gosh, I'm just learning After Effects and getting comfortable with it. Do I also need to learn how to animate traditionally? You don't, okay? The traditional animators that worked on this, I'm sure a lot of them do use After Effects, but that's not what they're best at. They're best at drawing and animating traditionally. And vice versa, the After Effects compositors who were compositing and putting this together and adding the finishing touches, maybe some of them can also do cell animation, but that's not what they're best at. They're best at the After Effects part. And so it's very good, and I always recommend that, especially when you're starting out, be a generalist. Learn a little bit of traditional animation. There's great resources out there for that too. And learning that will actually make your After Effects better as well. But don't think you have to be this good at everything, okay? The end goal is, a good way to think about it is you can be really, really, really successful being B+ at everything or A+ at one thing, all right? And that's just a personal preference, but I think pretty much everyone that worked on this was A+ at their thing.
Right. Right, but they probably started out as generalists too, I'm sure. So yeah, I think that's really good advice for the students. And I think we would be remiss if we didn't talk for a second about the design of this and why, on a fundamental level, even aside from the amazing animation, like why this works just from a design standpoint. And, my theory here is that, again, it goes back to the brief. Okay. I mean, this perfectly communicates this incredibly strange brief, which is like paranoid Hunter S. Thompson trying to read Kafka, who is already a paranoid, kind of Hunter S. Thompson guy of his age. Right. And then adding in kind of, I think the Hunter S. Thompson movie, the Fear and Loathing movie, played into this a little bit too. Just this sort of level of trippiness that they had going on here. I mean, it really is very dark and very grotesque, and it works perfectly from the brief and the sort of the lurid colors and everything kind of works from there. And the design in general is just amazing. I mean, the use of negative space in here is perfect. The alternate dark and light backgrounds. You think something like this might only have just be really, really dark, but there's actually a lot of very bright parts of this, and I think they really work that contrast really nicely. Great sound design as well, I should say. I mean, the one, I don't know, I don't really know if is it Johnny Depp who does the VO on this, or is it somebody doing an impersonation of Johnny Depp doing Hunter S. Thompson?
It's somebody else, I know, but they did a very good impression of Johnny Depp doing an impression of Hunter S. Thompson. And you pointed out the design, and this is kind of a recurring theme on this series, is that being good at After Effects and learning After Effects, that's not enough to be really good in this game. It's kind of, After Effects is the gateway drug. You get mad with power on just how amazing and powerful that software is, but then what you do with it is more important. You point out, the use of color here. There's little subtle things that hopefully our students that will keep learning and study design a little bit, there's almost none or very little white in this, right? Everything's a little yellow. Like if you look at the background, when it feels white, it's not white. It's actually a little yellow. And that's a subtle psychological thing you can do with design that kind of tells you, something's off. There's a lot of, this is one of my favorite tricks. There's a lot of kind of archetypical imagery in here, like teeth, that kind of just when you see teeth, you kind of feel like, oh, like there's just kind of something grotesque about it, and mouths distorting. And it may seem like when you watch it, it just seems like, oh, it's obvious that that's what you should show there. But like, think about it. The VO is saying one thing, and in your head, you have to come up with what's the image I'm going to put there. It's going to be someone looking up so I can see up their nostrils, and their mouth is distorted into this like rictus, and then their teeth are kind of showing, and the background's yellow. And those are all design choices and conceptual choices. And that's the stuff that once this class is over, I hope everyone listening starts to try to play with that stuff too, because now you've got the tools to make things move on screen. What do you put there?
Yeah, it's a very good point. And one that's, probably a little bit hard to hear at this point too, which is that, okay, so you're taking all this time to learn After Effects and now you know how to make things move really well, but, that's only half the battle. But it's still a super important part of the battle. Like you couldn't do it without that knowledge.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's something you just have to become comfortable with. If you're gonna do this for a living, the thing about it is the more you learn, the more you realize you don't know. It's unfortunate, but it's just the way it is.
It's true. I will say, if I had to criticize this piece at all, it probably is for that voiceover. I don't know if it's just that there's so many insanely beautiful visuals, but I don't think I ever really paid attention to what he was saying this whole time. I mean, you have a vague sense of it, but it's a little hard to understand what he's saying, actually, which you consider a criticism of this, but also, I still have no idea really what this is about exactly. Like he wants to buy a book to prop up the table that he's sitting at. Is that the idea, basically? And he hates Kafka?
I think, something like this, there's some pieces that have a clear message, and then there's some pieces that just create a mood that get you intrigued. And to me, that's kind of what this is. I don't think the goal was, okay, everyone who watches this should really understand what happened, but it should be like, wow, that was totally weird and cool. And what's usegoodbooks.com, And I certainly saw this and I was like super curious about Good Books, and you go to it and, it's not as interesting as the commercial that got you there. But, again, I mentioned it in the intro that we're going to talk about my favorite piece ever. This is probably my second favorite piece ever. I think it's a high watermark for motion design. This doesn't happen very often that something comes out this good.
Yeah, this is definitely in my top 5 too, I have to say. And I was thinking about this when I was looking at it, is like, what is this exactly? It's a 2-minute and 42-second commercial short film PSA like that never would have been made other than broadband internet, right? I mean, this just like where would this have even been shown if it had been made like in the 80s? Like there would have been no distribution. It would have got to like Spike and Mike animation festivals and like 100 guys would have seen it. I don't know. I just think it's so cool that there's a delivery system for these weird length pieces now. Yes. And they can just run with it and make it as long as they want and just, That's
the beautiful thing about this industry, Noel, is that it is growing so fast because of what you just said. 20 years ago, there was really only there were two screens people looked at, right? There was your TV and there was a movie screen. And maybe 20 years ago, people were, I don't think there was any video in 1997, right? So there was no online video, and if there was, it took forever to download on your modem and stuff. The internet and smartphones and tablets and just smart signage and all that stuff. Every screen needs motion designers. I really think it's an exploding field that still, at this point, is a little under the radar, but probably not for long.
Right. And I think when you add in AR into that, it's going to keep going for some time. I still think this is a growth industry for the time being.
Absolutely. All right, Noel, let's talk about my favorite piece. I can't wait anymore.
Cool, let's do it. I'm going to let you lead on this one because this is your favorite piece.
So everybody, and just to reiterate, before you listen to these episodes, you should be watching these pieces so that you've seen them and you know what we're talking about. So in 2013, my favorite MoGrapher, G-Monk, made my favorite piece ever. It's called Box. Now, this piece, the story behind it is interesting. G-Monk is, he really is like a true artist. If you listen to interviews with him, if you just look at his work and you go to his website.
Right. We looked at the Finn movie.
Yeah, we talked about like an old piece of his. But just the way he sees the world, the way he thinks, the way he acts, frankly, is very different. So he always has a unique perspective, right? So imagine that a client comes to you and they're like, hey, we make these robots that are very precise and we'd like to make a sales video for them. That's essentially what this is. Now, most people would come up with like, and the robots have names. They're called Bot and Dolly, these two robots that are in the film. Okay, so meet Bot and Dolly. They have, they have hydraulic systems, right? That is not what G-Monk did. G-Monk went completely the other direction, and he built this kind of rough storyline based around like old magicians and the way that they would do these shows and old magic tricks like levitation and teleportation and stuff like that. And so this piece, I'll tell you why it's my favorite piece ever. To this day, when I watch it, I still get goosebumps. The number one reason it's my favorite piece ever is actually the music. And I know this is something we've harped on a lot, that sound is probably half of the impact that you get on a motion design piece.
So true.
It doesn't get enough credit, frankly, but the music on this is so good that even without the visuals, it's still a really good piece. But then it's the perfect combination in my eyes of a brilliant concept. I think the concept for this is absolutely brilliant. There's not many pieces where you watch and you're like, holy shit, that was such a smart idea. And when I'm saying conceptually, I'm talking about literally like, let's use the idea of old feeling magicians, like doing like these cool practical tricks. And then on top of that, there's a brilliant concept in terms of how they would execute it, using the robots to project. And you have to see the making of to really understand how this was done. It's very technically complicated, but the idea behind doing it is also brilliant. And then, of course, the execution is brilliant. Simple black and white shapes. The design's very simple, actually. You kind of get lost in how cool the technique is, but the design is not that crazy. The animation's not that crazy, but the idea, every single thing they did, you're like, whoa, for like 5 minutes. And you put all those things together, and it's something really special. This piece transcended motion design. Like, it wasn't just motion designers talking about this. It was on, I caught it on a million different blogs, and it was, blew up on YouTube. And it was just one of those things. And this thing really put G-Monk on the map. He was already on the map, but after this, I think he designed the splash screen for Windows, and a car company hired him to do something similar to this piece. I mean, and he's now in rare company, and he's at the point where you want to hire G-Monk, he'll tell you how much he costs, and you pay that. And there's not many people that are there, and he's one of them.
Right. Well, there's very few people that are on our list of the history of motion graphics twice, and he is one of them. I mean, Buck is not an individual, they're a company, but they're on there twice. But that's pretty much it. I mean, I guess Joe Mullen kind of is on there twice. But yeah, I don't think you mentioned this, so I just want to throw this in here, that this is all projection mapped onto these surfaces as well. I think the first time I saw this, I thought the robots were holding up monitors where there were, basically there was animation happening on there already. And I don't know enough about how this was put together, but they took something that was already very technical and complicated, which was just to like coordinate these robots in this screen. And then they added this whole other insane level of technical ability, like, on top of it, of having something that must lock together with the robots and project perfectly onto these screens. And I don't know how they coordinated all that. I guess it was some sort of code thing at that point. It's all like locked together, like a motion control.
So this is what it was. So there were actually 3 robots in the creation of this. Okay. So the camera was on a robot, and the reason the camera had to be on a robot was because it needed to be exactly in the right place at exactly the right time. And these robots were used on the film Gravity. So these are really robots used for like motion control and really, really precise camera moves and things that need to be repeatable over and over again. And so, so there was a camera on one of the robots, right? And then the two robots holding screens. And you're right, there was a projector projecting things not only onto the robots, but onto the floor. And they they either had another projector or just some lighting that was synchronized to it so that behind the robots, at times, there would be lights that would kind of turn on and stuff. And when you projection map something, the trickiest thing is you have to project the image, and it has to be rendered from the perspective of whoever's going to be viewing it. Okay. So typically it's so complicated just to do that you don't have a moving camera if you're projection mapping something. So to have a moving camera and have the projected stuff react correctly to that camera to keep the illusion of perspective, I can't even fathom how they figured that out, right? But they needed robots to execute the camera moves, and I mean, it's just so precise. It's terrifying. There's a great behind the scenes video on YouTube you can find. We'll link to it in the show notes. If you go to Gmonk's site, there's production stills. It's really interesting. He has a bunch of style frames he did for this too, as he was trying to figure out what should be on the screens. And he found I can't remember his name, some Russian artist who did these kind of geometric things, and that inspired him to use this. And it's crazy. And one other thing that I love about this is that it's enough to just have abstract visuals on a screen and it's cool. But there's an arc to this. There's a story. Even it's not like a literal story, but it starts a little slow and it amps up. And at the end, there's this big moment. And then at the very end, there's this reveal where all of a sudden the lights turn on and you see the robots. And the music matches that perfectly. And that is storytelling. And that's another big thing that motion designers really, I think, should study is how do you keep an audience engaged, even if you're just showing them abstract shapes, with no voiceover and very little explanation for what you're looking at. How do you make it still have a beginning, middle, and an end? And this is a great example, I think.
It really is. I was going to say, I don't know which specific artist he referenced on this, but some of the work on screen reminded me a little bit of the op art movement in the 60s, and this artist, Bridget Riley, who didn't put things in motion, but did a lot of those really high contrast, kind of black and white geometric things where, it kind of almost takes on a look of a weird perspective right away. And I think part of this is that, what you're talking about, is just so cool the way it all lines up with the perspective. When he's pulling, it looks like he's pulling the box forward and it's getting deeper and deeper and deeper. I love that shot. And he's shoving it from side to side, and you really, the perspective locks in so perfectly. I mean, it really is magical. I think though, probably my favorite, you just talked about the end, but that moment where you can see the wireframe of the robots happening behind the screens. I mean, that's a real magic trick moment for me where it's it looks perfect both ways, I also do want to point out here that one thing that I think that makes this really special is the human form in there. One of the things we talk about in the class is dancing, and I showed examples of dance. And I think that, if this didn't have that human form in there, the human form in this piece, and it was just robotics and projection mapping, I don't think it would be quite as successful, because I think there's something about having it play off of and interact with the person that really brings another additional special part to this project.
Yeah.
The power of choreography and the mixture of choreography and graphics is really special here.
Yeah.
And robotics.
And this is, when this piece came out, I think it made me realize more than anything I'd seen before that motion graphics, which is up till this point really lived on flat screens and the content was static. It was kind of entering a new era where now you can, it's interesting. Motion graphics is what we're talking about, what this stuff has been called for a long time. And now the term motion design is sort of coming into vogue. And it's interesting if you think about what that means. When we hear MoGraph, what we think of is using After Effects to make stuff for TV or the web or whatever. But motion design, if you really break it down, it's we are doing design and we are making it move. And there are so many mediums now you can project onto buildings. You've talked a little bit about AR, augmented reality, VR, virtual reality. These are all things that we're just kind of at the dawn of that right now. But the skills that you're learning in this class, using After Effects to tell stories, and after this, as you go on to learn more about design, maybe 3D software, all of those skills will be used to tell stories, not just on static screens and not just for passive consumption, but for things like this, where there's literally a live audience watching the projection, and there's, there's a dancer, like choreographed to time out with it. It really opened up my mind to the possibilities of this. It's really a powerful piece.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And I think it does kind of hint to me toward like an AR future a little bit in here, because of when it expands off the screens and it starts just working in the world around him, which is such a nice moment in this piece, then it really kind of like opens it up that you think, oh, well, this is going to be happening around us in real life, in 10 years or whatever. So, an amazing piece. And I think the audio is made by Sounds Red.
Yeah, it blows my mind. So, and it's interesting too, because there's a lot of people that do audio for motion design stuff. A lot of the stuff that ends up on sites like Motionographer are done by only a handful of studios. Ant Food, Sonos Sanctus, Cypher, and they're all brilliant. But there are a lot of musicians out there who are just really good at writing music. And all the students listening, when you get to the point where you can sort of direct your own things and you get to pick the music, I always come back to pieces like this and I think about how they make me feel. And because when you talk to musicians and you're telling them what you want, it's easier if you're a non-musician to say things like, I want this to start out feeling calm, and in the middle, I want it to feel a little tense. And then at the end, I want it to resolve and feel like mysterious. And that's exactly what this is. I literally could just listen to this music on loop. I'm not kidding. And one other thing I want to point out to you before we move on is that a piece of this caliber is rare. At this point, there's got to be 100 new motion design pieces every week coming out. Probably more than that, but like good pieces coming out. But this, I haven't seen something that was executed at this level, just across the board, concept design, execution, sound, everything, really since then. Now, this is subjective. You might disagree with me, but I think that it's going to be a little while before we see something that's this mind-blowing and this groundbreaking.
Yeah, I agree with you. This breaks a lot of ground, and it does it, like you said, it takes it off the screen. So it's a game changer, no doubt. We do see a lot of people working in the sort of experimental projection map realm, and have for a little while now. But combined with the robotics, this is a whole different thing. This is just next level, no doubt. So yeah, G-Monk, genius. But let's move on and talk about a different genius now, a guy named Patrick Clair, who has been responsible for some of the most memorable and amazing TV title sequences in recent history. We're going to talk about one for the True Detective show, which came out in 2014. And this is basically, to me, this is a real continuation of Seven and through the 6 Feet Under titles and into someone like Patrick Clair, who really gets into the head, the psychologically of the characters and what they're all about, which I think is very much based on, kind of Kyle Cooper's thinking from Seven. And, but the great thing about Patrick Clair is that he's arriving at this time when TV has become the prestige medium for our world. It used to be that when you were like the king of titles, you were doing film titles. And now I think Patrick Clair doesn't seem as interested. I think he's only done one film title sequence. He just does these really high profile TV shows like this. And for this, he won an Emmy, and it just was like a huge piece. I think this is another grandma piece. Basically, if your grandma's a little edgy, she definitely saw this show.
Not my grandma.
But this whole idea about the double exposures and the sort of silhouettes, that's become just a huge design trope. So, he started something big here, definitely.
Yeah, and you would probably know this, Noel, but he didn't actually start this look. This wasn't something he created. He was inspired by, I think, a photographer that that did this. And with this piece, to me, I think the importance of this piece is that, like leading up to 2010, 2011 and beyond, there was a lot of concern in the motion design community every time something cool came out with how do they do it. And we kind of got to a point where the resources are out there now and the knowledge is out there now to kind of learn how to do anything. you can go to YouTube and Google, how to After Effects True Detective, and like there's probably 10 tutorials that show you how to do it. And it's not really that difficult. You're basically screening one image over another, over a white background or a light colored background, and maybe you have a matte, maybe you shot actor on a green screen so you can get a good edge. But what's so cool about this is the idea and the design and the technique and the execution, how they did it, followed from that. And that's the way it really should be. A lot of these amazing pieces, they don't come about from someone learning 3D and saying, ooh, I want to use 3D on something. It's, some auteur, I don't know if I pronounced that right. Saying, this is what I want. This is how I want it to feel and look. I don't care how you make it. So that's kind of the world we're in now, where knowing After Effects, again, I said this already, not enough. What are you going to do with After Effects?
It's true. And Patrick Clare, he was a designer and an animator. That's how he started out. But now he doesn't design or animate anything in particular. I mean, he just is the director of these pieces. And he hires wonderful animated, teams of animation and design. Like this guy, Raoul Marx, that he works with a lot, who's amazing, who does animation and design. And I think actually Raoul Marx might have designed the True Detective piece, I believe. So like we were saying before, there are these big teams of people. And Patrick Clare has the ability to head up that team and to basically make a lot of decisions the way that a director does at all steps. Like, does this work with the concept? Does this work with the concept? And sort of say yes or no to various things that his team produces. And that's kind of the vision that puts this together. So it's slightly different than just like being one guy in like your room kind of working on stuff. But that's definitely how he started out. But let's talk about the design here a sec. So apparently he was in a meeting with the showrunners and he was actually fairly uninspired. And then one of them said, the real thing that we're trying to do here is show the inner landscape of these characters as seen through these wasted kind of petrochemical, landscapes that they inhabit. And for whatever reason at the meeting, that just really hit Patrick Clare. And he was like, oh, that gives me my idea. And it kind of flowed right from that idea. And it really works. I mean, these characters, you could tell who they are by looking at these landscapes and just how polluted they are. And they're kind of torn and split, and they're not fully formed, and they're kind of ghostly in some sense. I think design here really captures the intent of the show really beautifully, and that's why it works so well.
It's that's a good piece of advice when you get to the point where you're working with clients. Is actually to listen to your clients, because a lot of times, a lot of times clients who hire motion designers know nothing about motion design. They know nothing about design. They just know, I need this and I want it to feel a certain way. And as motion designers, a lot of times we can just kind of get caught up in like, oh, I really want to do this because I saw this cool thing and I've always wanted to do it. And I'm going to shoehorn that into what you're asking for so that we can both win. And that's not a good way to approach this career. Listen to your clients, and that's really great. I want to talk a little bit about the production techniques here, because when this came out, this was another thing where, like I said, that how was it done? That's not the driving force behind motion design anymore, but it's still there. It's still pretty strong. Right. And, when you look at this, it's not easy to tell how a lot of it was done. Luckily, if you go to there's an Art of the Title write-up about this that we can link to, and it has a little bit of behind the scenes and actually some little motion tests and stuff like that. And
oh yeah, it's got the pitch deck and everything, and it's amazing.
It's really great. So we'll link to that. But a lot of this was just taking still images and using a technique called projection mapping. Now, this is a 3D term, and essentially what they would do if they wanted a very slow head turn from Woody Harrelson was they would build a 3D model of his head, very rough, doesn't have to be super accurate, and then they would essentially in 3D project a picture of his face onto that model. So now you have a 3D model that looks exactly like Woody Harrelson. And as long as you only turn it a little bit this way or that, it looks very real. And so rather than having to like bring the actors in and have like a high-speed camera and do lots of camera moves and track those things, they built a lot of that in 3D, and then they would bring it into After Effects and composite using this screen technique where they would, they would screen an image that was brighter than the actor over the actor, and that way it would show through. And maybe they would use an alpha channel, like an alpha matte or a luma matte, depending on what software.
Yeah.
And that's really it. And so I call that out because when you see these, and I'm talking to the students listening, when you see these, hopefully you're starting to say to yourself, oh, I kind of see how they did that, and I could do that. And your education as a motion designer will never stop. I'm just going to tell you that right now. You might eventually want to start learning 3D a little bit, and you don't. And this is the type of thing that a well-versed generalist could pull off. I think something at this level would be very hard for one person to pull off, but a smaller team can do something like this as long as you have the right generalists, and really the design and the concept are the king here again, like pretty much everything we're talking about today.
Yeah, I think this was a smaller team. This is a little bit earlier. This is kind of the piece, other than the Stuxnet piece, which he made, which you should also check out, but he made that a long time ago. This was the piece that opened him up. And I think after this, he started to have much larger teams. But I think you're right that a smaller team probably put this together. And interestingly, a lot of this is CG, even some of the stuff that you would never, ever guess, like the stripper's butt is
right.
CG, which I never realized. I was looking this up. I always thought that was a live action shot. I was always hoping that was a live action shot, but it turns out it's not. But I mean, that's pretty amazing that they were able to put that together that well, where you can't really tell the difference. And I love the composite on that shot too, not to dwell on it, but the little grasses and things in the landscape shot almost make it look like sort of peach fuzz, like on the butt or whatever. Like the way that combines together is just amazing.
Well, that's,
I mean,
that's just like brilliant art direction, and thinking at a level one step higher than the average person's going to think, And I'll say this too, because you're right. When you see that shot, it looks like, they hired an actress who needed some money, I guess. But I don't know what the talent release looks like, for that shot. But the tools now and the resources, you can get 100% anatomically accurate models on Turbo Squid for $100 and pose them and use some grayscale gorilla textures to texture them real quick, and then use the built-in like physical renderer to get some nice depth of field, and it looks real. And these are things that it used to take weeks and tons of money to do, and now like if you can think of it and you just that's why I like generalists, because you just need to know enough about everything to know what's possible. And now you can just go to YouTube and say, how do I do it? It's pretty liberating. And when you see something like this, like one person could pull off something pretty close to this if they were properly motivated.
Wow. Yeah. Not me.
Well, yeah, neither of us, but I mean, talented people know,
One thing I want to mention here too is the type design and type animation is very, very minimal. And this kind of goes through a lot of his work. It's like, pretty sort of just readable and there, and we don't really think about it that much. It's not like a lot of fancy, like kind of animation kind of thing. And in part, that's because I think they need to keep this a little bit modular so that if somebody's name changes to the next episode. But I think that's partially just his aesthetic. I think he wants to have us look at the pictures and have the pictures really tell the story and not have us focus so much on the words. And so the words don't compete at all with the imagery, I think.
Yeah.
I will say we did talk a bunch about 3D, and in 2013, After Effects, one of the things that they built in was the Cinema 4D Cineware integration thing. And I was wondering if you wanted to talk about that and whether you think that's just a huge game changer for After Effects.
It is. So the thing currently, what Noel's talking about is when you buy After Effects now, when you have a Creative Cloud subscription, it comes with a version of Cinema 4D called Cinema 4D Lite. Now, that version of Cinema 4D is fairly handicapped, as it probably should be, because they're just giving it to you with After Effects. So to do stuff like this, projection mapping, you'd think you need to pay for the full version. In reality, that free version can actually do this projection mapping technique we're talking about. Now, it can't do a lot of things you would still need, like, to be able to accurately model things in 3D, you need some good modeling tools, and they don't include those with the free version. But if you can find a model on Turbo Squid, and you can still do stuff like this. So I think it's great because you'll hear different opinions on this. Some motion designers I've heard like recently say that to be a successful motion designer today, you have to know some 3D. It's not enough to just be an After Effects artist anymore. I don't think we're quite there yet. I think that it depends on the market you're in. If you're in a market with a lot of work, there will always be tons and tons of After Effects work, okay? But if you're in a smaller market, then you might have a lot more downtime if you don't know any 3D and you can't edit a little bit and you can't really design very well. So that's why generalists tend to do better and to rise through the ranks faster. And generalists tend to be the ones that rise through the ranks and become directors, because now, and it's interesting, to see someone like Patrick Clare, who is very, very talented in his own right, but realizes now, and this is one of the hardest things to realize when you make this transition, is that as good as he is, there are designers that are 10 times better. There are animators that are 10 times better, compositors that are 10 times better. His strength is coming up with a vision and leading a team to a good result.
Yes.
And
selling a client on an idea too.
Exactly. And actually the next piece that we're about to talk about has a similar story behind it. And again, another insanely talented artist realizing that there are designers who maybe for this project are a better choice, animators that can animate better and stuff like that, and learning to direct. So that's something our students can kind of start to plan ahead in 10 years to strive towards. Become a good generalist, get lots of work, learn as much as you can. And then when you get to the point where you can direct, now you hire the specialists, those, A+ people.
Right, and you can talk their language, all of their languages, because you know what you're talking about. I mean, the difference, even just for me, between working for a creative director who understands After Effects and a creative director who's never opened After Effects is so huge.
Yes.
I mean, if they say opacity, they're talking about opacity, for example. They're not trying to say and then the thing fades out, and you're like, well, fade out meaning this or that or that. Yeah, no, I mean, it's such a huge thing. Yeah.
Yep.
So well, you're talking about Ash Thorpe, and you're talking about this next piece, which I always heard it called FITC, but you seem to pronounce it Fitzy. So do you know something that I don't?
To be honest, I don't know why I call it Fitzy. I think there's an interview with Albert Omos, who also worked on this. I think he called it Fitzy. But anyway, Fitzy, for those of you that don't know, is it's a design conference. And they had, I guess, a conference in Tokyo in 2015. And with all of these conferences, there's always a video opener for the conference. Yeah. And these things have just turned into who can one up, who can one up the next person. And
huge prestige.
They're always amazing. Yeah. And of course, there's never any money for them, but do whatever you want. And they all, a lot of times they win awards, they're Vimeo staff picks. They're always really cool. These are those projects that as a studio, you have to do for free to get better paying work. Yep. And this was led by the incredible designer, illustrator, director, Ash Thorpe, who is a very big name in our industry.
Very big name, and who's been just getting bigger. And I think it's sort of like with the Good Books Metamorphosis. I feel like if you hadn't heard of Ash Thorpe by the time this piece came out, then you heard about him for sure. It just, this just dropped like a bomb onto our community. I felt like, I feel like it seemed like the future. And it still looks a little bit like that. I mean, I think in the years since it's maybe diminished a little bit, but when this came out, it just seemed like, okay, it had this kind of real Japanese thing, I guess, because it was for this Tokyo event. But from what I read, I think also Ash Thorpe started out this design process by being in Japan and making a series of posters. And then the design of the entire piece was based on those posters. And you can definitely check those out online, and we'll link to them. They're really beautiful in and of themselves. But then, yeah, like you were saying, he kind of assembled this huge team of people, all of whom were incredibly specialized, and including that guy, Albert Omos, that you were talking about. I mean, we definitely have to talk about his contribution. He also, I believe, worked on the Good Books Metamorphosis piece, doing some of that crazy bug stuff as well, I think. But let's just talk about the design here for a sec. So it's like, I think part of the reason this is so awesome is that it kind of it worked to combine a lot of styles to make something new. So you have the kind of flat geometric style, which has been happening for a while. Plus, this got in on some very sophisticated texturing, and I think it was kind of maybe at the start of this current texturing thing that everybody's going through, but also the type design is really special here. They took, Roman or whatever Western characters and then combined them with Japanese characters to make this kind of modular alphabet system that's incredibly beautiful and makes it feel very Tokyo and futuristic. And I guess the colors and things too are fairly like neon and bright and like urban and stuff. So those are really, when this came out, it just really opened everybody's eyes. I feel like pushed things in a little bit of a different direction.
Yeah, 100%. So, see, when I saw this, I have to call out the music is so good on this. It's the music was done by this guy. His name's Anthony Burns, I think, and he goes by the name Pilot Priest. And Pilot Priest has actually put out some incredible albums. You can get them on Spotify, or iTunes or wherever. And he's a collaborator, frequent collaborator with Ash Thorpe. And you see this a lot with kind of the best shops and the best directors out there, that they kind of have their favorites that they find and they always keep working with. The design of this, it's glitchy, right? And we've seen glitchy a million times, but whenever you see glitchy stuff, there's typically an element of chaos to it. It looks cool, but you're giving up some control, because to make glitchy looking things is kind of tedious. There's it kind of breaks things into a lot of pieces. There's a lot of pieces to then create and manage.
Right.
And so if you use like a plugin or something to create glitches, then it could look cool, but you're not going to have total control over it. You can pause this video on any frame. It doesn't matter. And the colors work, the composition work. It's glitchy, but controlled. And that is so difficult to do. So just on an execution level, I was blown away by how they pulled that off. I mean, there's a million little flickers and the color changes for like 2 frames. But even in those 2 frames, they made the colors work really well, which tells me that this was probably either they built some kind of rig to help them do that, or they were literally setting tons and tons and tons and tons of keyframes on the color for this. And even on, when things move and they glitch and they're over here for 1 frame and they're over here 2 frames later, those compositions are all really nice and balanced, and it's just so much thought and detail went into this. Albert Omos, his specialty, he's I think he actually works for Microsoft now. He's a very interesting guy, and he calls himself a computational artist, meaning he doesn't sit down with a pencil and paper and draw and design the way Ash Thorpe does, in kind of in the traditional graphic design way. He uses software like Houdini, and he uses just straight up code. I think he's used processing in the past. And other like just really hardcore software. And he'll build these systems that create weird visuals that are interesting. And they're not design in the sense of what you think of when I say design, but they're just interesting and cool. So a lot of these textures that are super dense and super complicated were built using probably Houdini. That's probably his tool of choice today. Using these weird like node setups and math and code to create things that if you had to do it by hand would be impossible. It would just take forever. But he can build these weird systems. And I think there's actually, if you go to his Vimeo page, I think he's actually got some experiments he did during the creation of this. He talks about, the thought behind it. And he was trying to build little basically simulations of the way DNA works. It's crazy. And then it just ends up being a slight little texture in this piece. And that's the level of detail that went into it. And it's still, I think it really holds up. But I will say, watch it without the audio. 7 out of 10. Watch it with the audio, it's 10 out of 10. The audio really helps this piece.
Right. You talked about something that I think is super important about this, and it's about sort of harmony meets chaos. And I think that's one of the real strengths of both the animation and the design here. And they both work on that same level, which is, and even the music. It's really like this interesting build where it starts off very minimal and you see just like one little square move over and then another little thing. And then it starts off very, very small and contained and, very harmonic, I think. And then at a certain point, the chaos just kind of takes over. but even still, they're constantly finding these moments of harmony in the chaos. I think it's really wonderful. I mean, as a design achievement, it's amazing. And it does seem very influenced by a certain Japanese style or Japanese way of thinking to me. Every time I think about this, I feel like, oh yeah, it had to be for Tokyo, this piece. Yeah, and and we should talk about the animation a little. The camera transitions, they're really like left, right, up, down, zoom in, or rotate. I mean, they're not, it's sort of like Gretel. It's like this beautiful design, but in a way, we're moving around in a fairly simple way. I mean, it's all perfectly timed and, animated and everything, but it's not crazy transitions like the Buck Metamorphosis piece. We're just sort of moving over, or we're moving in or through. So that's interesting. And I think if it was too overly animated, it would probably lose that sense of balance that we were talking about. So I think it's pretty perfect. Yeah. You mentioned Gretel, and we'll link to them too in the show notes. They are probably my favorite studio that does branding. On-air brands and stuff like that. Their stuff is so clean. It's just, the design is so high level. And I want to point this out to the students about this piece. So some of the textures and the way that those were made is crazy, right? But to be honest, you probably could have gotten a similar effect by just finding the right texture on Shutterstock or something like that, or going out with a camera and taking a picture of something weird, right? The animation in this, the production techniques, literally just taking this class, you could make this, okay? And that's really interesting, because this is on our list in the history of MoGraph as one of the greatest pieces ever, and yet the actual production technique is very, very simple. So I'm going to harp on that again. That design and concept and the overall effect on your viewer of your piece, that's what's important, not how it was done. So even just understanding how to make basic keyframes, how to make masks, how to do alpha mats and luma mats, how to parent things, you can make something really, really, really beautiful. You don't have to know 3D. You don't have to know fluid simulations. And this is a trap that I see a lot of people fall into once they get hooked on the motion graphics thing, is they want to learn the next thing. They want to learn the next thing. They want to learn the next thing. And the next thing for everyone listening, I think, should be design and animation. Don't try to learn new software. Don't try to start getting really fancy with expressions and this and that. I would focus on the basics, because that's all this is. This is just the basics, now executed at a very high level. And the other thing I'd point out about this is that, a lot of the things we've done in this class, a lot of the homework that the students have been doing, probably not hundreds, thousands of keyframes, right? Dozens of keyframes maybe. And when you're learning After Effects, you might be afraid to lay down too many keyframes, because then it's something else to manage. I guarantee you there were thousands of keyframes in this piece. Thousands and thousands and thousands of keyframes. That's the only way something like this happens, and pre-comps upon pre-comps upon pre-comps. And you'll build to that. Eventually, it'll become second nature, and it won't scare you to have something 12 pre-comps deep with 50 keyframes on it. When you're starting out, it does, and that's okay. But just know that that's the road you're on. That's where you're heading, is to be at a level where it doesn't matter how many keyframes it takes. You'll just keep adding them until you like it. Right.
It's just.
But you should also take away some too. I was going to say,
right.
One thing you should also be learning is restraint. It's like how to edit. And a lot of times what I see from my beginning students is that they think more motion always equals better motion. And that's not true at all. And I think this piece kind of shows that. It's like, no, the motion should just be exactly what it needs to be. And that's it. And that's what you see in this piece. There's not a wasted moment ever in any of this animation or in any of this design. Everything's deliberate. I'm sure you're right. There's probably 10,000 keyframes in here, but somebody looked at each one of those and made sure it was exactly right. There's no mistake in here.
Yeah. And the animation too, it's very precise. It's very mechanical too. So, if you go on and you take a class like Animation Bootcamp, you'll learn that there's these animation principles, right? Where there's one that we talk about. We call them oscillations. Essentially, something kind of moves the opposite way first, and then it goes where it's going to end up, but it goes a little too far, and then it comes back. So it anticipates, and then it overshoots. And there's none of that in this piece, because it's not appropriate for the mood here. This is supposed to feel, basically the end title lockup looks like a microchip, which makes sense, because if you go to Tokyo, that's what the city feels like. There's neon everywhere and everything's electric. And robots and mechanical things don't move the way humans do. They're precise. So even the animation choices just make a lot of sense. And that also has the side effect of being simpler and requiring less movement, less keyframes. But there was thought behind it. There was a reason behind it.
Oh yeah, no, it's all moving exactly for the reason that it wants to. I think there's lots of like hold keyframes going on in here too. There's a real, even in the animation, there's that real balance between glitchiness and fluidity. There's also a lot of brilliant easing going on here too. I think it's just a real contrast and it's a real balance. I think you just hit the nail on the head when you talked about balance with this piece. I think that's everything here.
Yep. So this piece holds up. And now I think, I'm interested to talk about this next piece because it's an interesting choice. And I'd love to hear why you picked this one.
Okay, so we're talking about 2017's MailChimp introducing Facebook ads by Giant Ant. And the reason that I chose this, and it's kind of interesting, is because I did think that Giant Ant was a worthy includer to put on this list because they represent something a little bit different and a kind of a move forward for me. As opposed to somebody like Buck, I feel like Giant Ant represents trying to be community oriented and mindful and give back to the community a lot more. And also they have this ethics thing going on at Giant Ant that I really admire, which is like, we don't want to work for gross big companies like McDonald's or whatever because they pay the bills. We want to work with, something that's going to help, I feel like. And I feel like even though they've wound up doing a lot of work for the tech sector, which is arguably evil as well, maybe, but they're very good at putting a very friendly face on things. And they do that really well. And I think it is a bit of a trend of today. And they just deserve to be on this list somewhere. I wasn't sure exactly which piece to put on, but I really like this one because it does combine everything. And that's sort of something that they do well. I mean, traditional animation, motion graphics in a more like vectory or shape or geometric sense, 3D, plus texturing, plus colors. I mean, they do it all and they do it really well. So that's kind of why I included this piece on the list.
Yeah, I think, I think it would have been cruel if we hadn't put Giant Ant on this list. And that's something that, that's a little inside baseball there. Like, so when you're getting into the industry and you see a Giant Ant piece and you see a Buck piece and they're both amazing, it's very easy to say, oh, well, those two companies are probably very much alike, and they could not be further apart. They're extremely different companies. And I think Giant Ant probably would have had a tough time making ends meet 15 years ago, right? But now, because the type of work they do, a lot of times isn't big budget commercials, right? Yet they're a 15-person team. They've got overhead, and this is the most interesting thing about them that you alluded to is that they are very ethical and they will not work with certain clients. They will only work with clients if their values meet Giant Ant's values, which is a luxury that, they've earned that luxury by creating the work that they've created. But I think it's also a luxury that they enjoy that Buck probably couldn't have done when Buck was founded because there wasn't enough work to be able to say no to stuff like that. And I think that this is the perfect piece to end the series on because it is the prototypical modern motion design piece. It combines everything basically. There's cell animation, there's abstract kind of 2D design, but then there's really slick After Effects animation, lots of texture, tons of personality to it, great sound design, great storytelling chops. I'm not sure there's any true 3D in here. A lot of times, artists,
maybe the coin.
Yeah. And a lot of times like you'll make a 3D element just for reference to trace it later. I mean, but that's the thing, you can't tell, right?
Tell.
And Giant Ant has established themselves, I think, as one of the best studios at storytelling. That's kind of their gift. And Buck has that too. Buck's amazing at it too. Giant Ant just has a different voice. And everything, it's like, I have not seen a bad Giant Ant piece. Maybe they just don't publish them. That's also, that could be the case too. But they're masters of storytelling and they're just masters of this craft. And this is now, if you want to open a motion design studio and hang with the big boys, this is the bar. This is how good you have to be now.
Yeah, yeah. And in a way, I feel like they're in ascendancy over Buck. I feel like, I don't know, we'll see what happens, but I feel like Giant Ant is still rising and getting better, and Buck has peaked, but I don't know. We'll see what happens. Famous last words, I guess, but anything can happen.
Yeah.
I don't know why I say that. It's just a gut feeling. And I want to say, too, that this is not that different from like an explainer video. Like, this is just basically like visual storytelling. It's just like what Joey was saying is like, they're so good at telling the story that they take it to this other level of things that you never would have thought of. This giant truck and the like, if you really listen to the voiceover and then look at what images they're pairing with it, they're non-intuitive. I mean, they're having a lot of fun coming up with things that the script kind of stays one level ahead of the audience. It's constantly challenging us. And there are just some really fun, really wonderful even just like little things in here. Like the way we worked on a project in this class with a mouse arrow moving across the screen. I kind of love the way they put these little stretch.
Yeah.
Just that little thing, like probably came on at the end or whatever. It wasn't like part of the brief or, the storyboard, but it's just this nice little thing. I did also notice, scrolling through the credits of this, that our friend Taylor John Peters worked on this piece. He must have been an intern there at the time. But yeah, I really dig the texturing, the colors. I mean, they've got this like marble paper thing going on. They've got these wood textures, and then they've got these kind of just like stippled kind of texturing that's very popular today. It's a lot of textures, but it all really works together, and it never gets in the way of understanding the clear image that's on screen all the time. I mean, it's really cool.
Yeah, they are very good at recruiting some of the best designers. And, Lucas Brooking, who's an incredible art director, designer, he got I think he got his big break at Giant Ant before going to Buck. The art director on this is Raphael Mayani, who is incredible. And it's very difficult to have this much going on screen and still have clarity. Where am I supposed to look? It's pretty unbelievable. I want to talk about the animation in this, because another thing Giant Ant's great at is hiring brilliant animators like Enrique Barone, and they had Jorge J. Arcanist before he was freelance, and he went from Buck to Giant Ant. Giant Ant is where he kind of made his name. And what they seem to like, whether they're doing it in After Effects, whether they're doing it in cell animation, or if they're hiring 3D artists to do stuff, it's snappy. There's a ton of contrast in the movements. There's these very quick moves, like 1-2 frame, boom, and then there's like a hold with like a little bit of an impact, for like 8-10 frames. And when you start out in After Effects and you haven't really studied animation, it's very easy to try to make things smooth and not too fast, and actually fast followed by slow. That's kind of like the magic formula. So watch this piece with that in mind, and always try to add more contrast in your animation. Typically, the more contrast you add, the more interesting it is. And then you may have to dial it back if you're doing something like the Fitzy titles, like we just saw, which maybe don't need that kind of snappy, fun feel. They need something a little more robotic.
Right. Oh my goodness. Such a crazy comparison between this piece and that piece, because I mean, this is so restrained, and that's just so crazy and chaotic. Yeah, completely different. I was wondering too about you think technically at the beginning, this sort of car that turns into that truck with big wheels, that's like a whole big rigged thing, and that's like After Effects 3D layers. It definitely looks kind of like flat 3D there right at the very start, that truck thing. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I feel like if you look at it frame by frame, it's not that complicated. That's the thing with a lot of really great stuff like this. If you go frame by frame through it, there's not really that much going on. Like, what they probably did was they had a copy of the truck pushed backwards in Z-space a little bit, right? And then they probably just frame by frame drew the top of the, like with a mask or something, built the top of the car in, so it kind of creates the perspective for you. And when it's playing back, it's impossible to tell all that, and it looks magical, and you're like, how the hell did they do it? A lot of times that stuff's just brute force. There's like a clever way to kind of get halfway there, and then the rest is just a hand animated mask to create the illusion. And you can a lot of times spend more time trying to figure out the clever way to do it, and you'd already be done if you just did it,
Yeah, that's true. I want to start an animation studio just called Brute Force Animation. Basically, that's all we do. We don't look for clever solutions. We just power through it.
Yeah. I actually heard, we mentioned Albert Omos a couple of times. I've heard him speak, and he talked about that his job as a computational artist and a really kind of geeky animator, really smart guy, guy. His job when he was at Buck was to help the animators find ways to not have to brute force things. And to create systems and rigs that would let them animate and have total control, but do things that if you just did it by hand and had to just make keyframes for everything would be insane. But sometimes that breaks down or there's not time to build that system. And so he mentioned that we always know in the back of our minds that there is the possibility that we're going to brute force it. And that's just a reality of working in the animation medium.
Yeah, and I guess if you're already doing traditional cell animation, in a way, that's like brute force every frame in a certain way. Yeah. You know, I mean, there's no system. You're just drawing a different piece of art each frame. So, and kind of, they have that mindset already, I guess. Yeah, just a couple of transitions here that I really love are the cash register transition and then the pencil sharpener. I think Justin Laws might have animated that. It just like keeps going in and getting shorter and getting it shorter. And then just when it's completely short enough, it transitions again into the next thing. I just think that's, I don't know, so special and magical, that little moment.
I should say this for the students. So I don't know how this particular piece was done, but a lot of times, you know, when you see super clever transitions like that, where it's just like, God, it's genius how that shape turned into this shape, turned into this shape, that is kind of preconceived in the design phase. You know, especially there's multiple animators working on this. They probably all had different shots they were responsible for. And then at the end, one or two people went in and tied everything together. But when you have super clever, super well-designed transitions like that, it's hard to just figure those out when you get to After Effects. You need to think it through in the design phase. And so that's actually my favorite part about design is that it's not just the putting of pixels to screen. It's coming up with the ideas. It's kind of, you know, some people split that into something separate called concept. I kind of think it's all part of the same thing, you know, like, you need to see a laptop, you need to see a cash register. How do you get from one to the other? Well, it'd be cool if the top bezel of the cash register turned into, you know, and if you don't board that out and you just give the animator a picture of the cash register, a picture of the laptop, they may do something really simple. Oh, we just swipe to the left and then there's the new thing, rather than do these crazy morphs that are way more time consuming, but way cooler too.
Yeah. Sometimes you get jobs too where no transitions are indicated at all, and you do have to get from one shot to the next. And then that is part of the animator's wheelhouse, I feel like, is to kind of come up with something cool and make something other than just a swipe to the left, you know?
Yeah, I think, you know, so it's very interesting. So I talked to Joe Donaldson about this exact thing in one of the podcasts we did for Design Bootcamp. And for those that don't know, Joe Donaldson used to be an art director at Buck, really good designer, good animator, and now is an editor at Motionographer. And he said,
went to SCAD.
Yeah, and what he said was that he actually prefers that the designer do that thinking. Now, yeah, as an animator, it's really fun to think that stuff up. But when you're working at a studio and you're doing client work, you also have to think about what's the most efficient way to get the best result. And leaving that up to the animator isn't the best way to do that, because as a designer, you can mock up a transition frame to show your idea much faster than the animator can try to animate it and see if it works. Right? And so, yeah, as an animator, it is fun, and you will undoubtedly find yourself having to figure that stuff out. But if you have the luxury of doing a design phase first, I think it's at least the more efficient way to get these transitions figured out, even though it won't always happen. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I was just making the point that sometimes you get stuck with a board that has no transition indicated and you have to come up with something.
Yeah,
but
figure it out.
I wasn't working at Buck when that happened.
Correct. Figure it out, After Effects Monkey. That is exactly it. And the last thing I'll say about this is, you know, it has this quality to it that a lot of giant ant things do, which it's fun. And, you know, these are things we take for granted sometimes when we look at work. This is an advertisement for some really technical, obscure feature of MailChimp, which is itself kind of this obscure email marketing tool that most people will never use. And, you know, so why does it have 23,000 plays on it, right? Like why are people watching this who aren't like email marketers, right? And it's because it's fun. And that was a choice, a conscious choice by Giant Ant to make it fun. And that choice led to things like making the background pink and using this bright, beautiful kind of canary yellow color and making the MailChimp logo this kind of purple pink color. And a lot of the shapes and the textures are just really fun and they make you smile. And this could have been done with like a CG execution, and it would have felt more stale. And so the first thing you should always think about when you're doing a project is how should this make the viewer feel? And when you look at work through that lens, the Fitzy piece is that was designed to be seen by a live audience in a theater, on a big sound system with a huge screen in Tokyo. That, that helps you make a lot of your aesthetic choices and animation choices when you kind of think about it like that.
Yeah. Damn, that's a great point. That's the ultimate point here. Absolutely. Yeah, I don't think we need to add anything after that. Mic drop.
We have done the history of MoGraph, Noel.
That is awesome. Wow. Up till 2017 in any case, but
we'll have to revisit.
We'll have to keep it going.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I hope the students enjoyed this. Being in this industry, it's really helpful to have some context for things, to understand where these looks that maybe you've never seen, but to understand where they came from and have a little bit of the history of it in your mind. It can help you make design choices. It can help you find reference. And at the very least, it'll help you know who you should be following to try to spot the next big thing when it finally drops.
Absolutely. I mean, you could sum it up by saying you can't know the future without looking at the past. And I believe that is true. So thanks so much, Joey. This has been an amazing pleasure for me, and I hope for our listeners. So thank you again.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This was amazing, man.
Wow, I can't believe that we've come to the end of this series. I really enjoyed this, and I hope you guys did too. Let me thank Joey Kornman again for being my wingman on this. Obviously, he brings such a depth of knowledge, both about the technical and artistic sides of this field. He's just a real treasure. And even better, he's just such a damn good speaker, right? I mean, right? I could listen to that guy talk all day. So this was a ton of fun for me to research and put together, and I hope you guys learned a lot about the history of this industry. And believe me when I say that it's still changing a lot. If you're considering jumping into this game full-time, you should be aware of these changes and know that you will have to keep rolling with them as part of your career. You're going to have to keep learning new software, you're going to have to keep learning new techniques, and you're going to have to keep up with everybody who's doing all this awesome work around you. So definitely keep learning. I think that's the real key here. And keep curious. Keep looking back at old work like this and trying to understand it in its proper context. And definitely keep freaking out over all the newest, best stuff that comes out every day. And finally, if you do ever find yourself wondering, try to make applesauce out of prunes. It really does taste more like cranberries than rhubarb.